Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So 5 of the top 10 bidders for the RDOF auction have yet to receive any money or any notification that they'd be getting any money. What does that mean? Where's that all going to go? I don't know. We'll discuss it in a minute. Thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Broadband Deployment News. So I saw this article and it makes some good points in here. I thought kind of read through this and talk about what I think is going to happen and what some of the issues are. So this is a telecompetitor. It says the RDOF clock is ticking on 5 big winning bidders. Will it run out? So this is talking about RDOF, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. So this was a reverse auction that was done back a couple of years ago. This is money that comes from USAC, which is the organization that manages the USF funds. That's the little junk fee on your phone bill. And this money was originally like $20 billion that was becoming through RDOF through this reverse auction. Phase 1 is over, and phase 1 was meant to cover what's called unserved areas, which similar to the IIJA. Unserved is any census block that was under 25 by 3, because again, all we have right now is we know what census blocks, let's say, are not 25 by 3. Let's say the majority of that area. We don't know down to the address. So phase 1 was meant to improve service in those unserved census blocks that are not reaching 25 by 3. And then phase 2 was meant for after the broadband maps were out, the new FCC maps were out, and that would cover the little individual addresses that then we'd find that don't have 25 by 3, and then also any other areas that were not covered. That was phase 2. So phase 1 is over. That was like $9.2 billion. That's been, let's say, said that has been won. The auction was completed, and $9.2 billion has not been committed yet. But the FCC has said that that money has, let's say that people have won that money. I'm going to say won this way because they haven't yet, a lot of them haven't gotten any money. And then, so that's the 9.2. So about 5.2 billion of that has been committed. So the FCC has come out at various times and said that these particular companies have now been authorized. They're going to be getting their money. So out of the top 10, 5 of them have gotten their money, plus a whole bunch of smaller ones, but the five of the bigger bidders have not gotten anything. So you see here it says it's been 18 months since RDOF auction was completed, and the FCC has not yet released funding for 5 of the top 10 winning bidders. It's beginning to look like this isn't going to happen, considering that the other 5 top winning bidders have all had all or most of their funding released, as have scores of smaller winners. The Commission typically releases a ready-to-authorize list of RDOF winning bidders every month, and recently those lists have had only a small handful of smaller bidders on them. So like I say, they've been doing it fairly regularly. It's been about once a month that they've been saying ready to authorize, and then it's typically been like 14 or so days later that they then are ready to authorize that. Once it's ready to authorize, there's only 2 small steps that the winning bidder needs to do, and then it's authorized. So. But it's been, last time was like, I think mid-May that they did a ready to authorize list, and we haven't seen anything since. The top 10 winning bidders in the RDOF auction were collectively slated to win about 3/4 of the $9.2 billion tentatively awarded in the auction. So again, $5.2 billion has been awarded. So there's the remainder there, and out of the top 5, out of that 9.2, they've got 75% of that. The 5 large winning bidders that have not yet had funding released have received criticism for 3 key reasons. Starry, Resound Networks, and Nextlink tentatively won funding to deploy gigabit service using a mixture of fixed wireless and fiber broadband. Critics argue that gigabit fixed wireless is unproven in rural areas and have questioned its ability to meet required service parameters. So one of the things with RDOF was people could bid at a gigabit tier, or they could bid at lower tiers. So these guys bid at the gigabit tier. So they were bidding directly against some fiber operators that were going to be strictly fiber operators, and they did this mixture, I guess, of fixed wireless and fiber. So because of that, that would have reduced their costs. They were able to, I'm sure, take less support or less money. This was a reverse auction. So basically the bidders said, I will take X amount in order to do this, and then the next round of bidding would happen, and somebody would say, well, I'll take this much and this much. So that's how it went until somebody said, okay, I've had enough, and then you had your winning bidder, which was the one that would take the least amount of support. Well, if you're bidding with fixed wireless alone, or a mixture, let's say, of fiber and fixed wireless, which they'd probably have to do anyway, then you're going to have lower costs, so you could do a lower bid. So a lot of the critics here are complaining that this is unproven technology. There have been a couple of articles recently where Resound Networks and I think Nextlink were both saying, hey, we've been able to do gigabit broadband in various ways using 6 gigahertz or using this equipment. So they've been out there kind of promoting that they can do this. Of course, that could be under really favorable conditions, maybe not like you might see in bad weather or who knows what else. So there's still questions about technology. Then you've got SpaceX tentatively won funding for 100 megabit service. So again, they did not bid at the gigabit, and they can't do gigabit, but they did bid at the 100 megabit service. But critics have questioned the technology's ability to deliver those speeds and serve all the customers that SpaceX committed to serving. Some critics also have noted that the technology has a limited lifespan. So the issue with SpaceX is, a lot of people are looking at the speed test from Ookla, and they're saying, well, they're not, a lot of times they're not hitting that 100 megabit point. Now, we don't know Ookla, how reliable is that when you're really looking at the actual speed somebody's getting, because it could be that they're on a Wi-Fi network, it could be certain times of the day, it's not like the test that they're going to have to do if they get this money. But still, people are comparing the wired connections and satellite connections. They're saying, the satellite's still lagging behind the wired, especially on the upstream. They've got to get, I think it was supposed to be over 20 if they were going to provide this. So SpaceX, that's a question. They also mentioned here the technology has a limited lifespan. These satellites, I believe, after about 5 years, start to deorbit. So it's kind of a cycle that you have to go through. You get a bunch of satellites up in your constellation, and then 5 years later, they start to crash and burn, so to speak. I guess it's burn. Well, they don't crash; they just burn up in the atmosphere. And that's a concern as well. So there's a question as to whether this is an ongoing kind of business that you could maintain, because it costs a lot of money to get all these satellites up, and then you have to maintain them every 5 years or so, or that period of time that you've got to then replace that. And as you're growing your subscriber base, you need to keep more and more satellites up there. You need to get those satellites up there so that you have the bandwidth to be able to do this. So what we've seen is that SpaceX, when they first launched the service in an area, people get speeds that are well over 100 megabits per second, let's say, and then as more subscribers get on, then those speeds start to go down. And then SpaceX launches another batch of satellites. They can launch like 40 at a time, I think, right now. They launch another batch of satellites, and then speeds go up for a while. So you're seeing that kind of thing. So there's some question as to how stable this technology is. Let's see, the fifth large winning bidder, and it's actually the largest winning bidder, was LTD Broadband, a small company that traditionally deployed fixed wireless. They won funding for gigabit fiber. So this is a company that was doing wireless that won funding for fiber. So critics have questioned the company's ability to meet its deployment commitments, probably due to their size, their the financial situation, their experience, since they're doing fixed wireless normally, and now they're going to be doing fiber to the home. I'm assuming when they're saying gigabit fiber, they're talking about going all the way to the curb with that, all the way to the premise. So they don't have necessarily that experience. And they've shown that they've had some issues, because they've actually had some defaults, because there were places where they were supposed to get their ETC designation, that's eligible telecommunications carrier, because if you're going to take RDOF funds, in addition to doing broadband service, you need to be able to provide voice service over that as well. And they kind of missed the boat on that, and they've missed a couple of those things. So I think they just pulled out of California because of some issues. So they've not shown themselves to be doing a good job with this, and that's also the FCC's, I'm sure, going to take that into account. So these 5 companies have some issues, and the question is, will they ever get any funding? And maybe not. And then the question is, what happens from there? What does the FCC do with those areas? So it says here, the FCC has also come under fire over RDOF, as critics have argued that the Commission should have had more stringent screening in advance of the auction, rather than waiting after the auction to review and approve companies' long-form applications. So what they did was, everybody had to fill out a short-form application where they did give some basic information. It's like, I think on the short forms you still had to provide some financial information, if I recall. You had to provide, a good amount of information about your business, but you didn't have to completely provide like all of the technical details. And it may be that you didn't have to provide your financials specifically. I can't recall what was happening between the short form and the long form. Once they were approved, then they had to fill out a long form application. And that is what the FCC has been going over all this time. So one of the criticisms here is that the FCC should have been doing more of this due diligence prior to saying who actually won the money. Because the FCC looked at the short form applications and said, okay, LTD broadband, you win all these areas, and Starlink, you win all these areas. And now they're looking at the details, and it looks like they may authorize maybe some places, or they may not do anything on some of these companies. We'll have to wait and see. Carol Maddie, founder of Maddie Consulting, said several months ago that the FCC might never authorize certain winning bidders, but wouldn't reject them either because rejections could be appealed. Maddie was the deputy chief of the FCC Wireline Competition Bureau at the time the RDOF auction was established. We heard the same thing recently from Gary Bolton, CEO of Fiber Broadband Association, when we sat down with him. This is Telecompetitor. When we sat down with him at the Fiber Connect conference in Nashville last month. The FCC has no statutory obligation to approve long-form applications, Bolton said. In other words, there's no deadline to approve or reject the outstanding bids. So even though the FCC said, hey, here's a list of winning bidders, $5.2 billion that we've said are winning bidders, a good portion of that, possibly 75% of that, could be not awarded because the FCC just might say, well, you know what, we're not going to do the final authorization on that. And it mentions here a lot has changed in the last 2 years. Legislators have approved an unprecedented amount of funding for rural broadband deployments, and the new funding programs are more ambitious than RDOF was. As Chambers notes, the reality could provide a disincentive for the FCC to authorize some of the outstanding RDOF bids. And that's been my opinion as well, in that all this took place prior to the IIJA, the Big Infrastructure Act, where $65 billion has been allocated for broadband to help improve deployment, adoption, affordability, those kinds of things. With BEAD, the BEAD program being $42.5 billion of that for deployments to unserved and underserved areas. So with all of that money now being available, the FCC's got to be thinking, well, that wasn't there before, so what are they going to do? I really kind of think this is not taxpayer money. This is consumer money. This is coming from USAC through these USF fees. So so there was not really, I don't think there was any kind of a bill, bill associated with this. It was basically the FCC saying, here's what we're going to do with these funds. So I would think they could change their mind and say, okay, we've awarded everything that we're going to award, and then I don't know if there's any way to reallocate those funds so that they can go towards the BEAD stuff or augment the BEAD money, or how they plan on doing that. They are taking comments on how the three organizations, the FCC, NTIA, and USDA, can work together more closely. There's kind of a document of understanding that they put together that they're going to try to work together because they've all got these broadband programs, and we don't want to be duplicating efforts, and we want to make it as efficient as possible. So maybe somehow they'll work something out that way. But certainly, there's if we've done 5.2 billion, and there was 9.2 billion in phase 1, and then there's another 10 or so billion that would have been phase 2. It doesn't make any sense to me to continue RDOF. They've allocated some of this money, which is good, and they might allocate some more because this money is going to be available before the BEAD money. The BEAD money's got to wait on the FCC maps. So phase 1 of RDOF does not need to wait on the FCC maps. So some of that money is being sent out now, and they could, if there are other small providers on here, or maybe they will say with maybe one of these wireless providers like Resound or somebody like that, they might say, okay, you guys can have these areas. They might even say, who knows, they might even say on Starlink, that's okay, this is on top of a mountain where it's going to be really hard to get fiber there. You guys can have this area. They might do some of that. And that money can then get out there quicker, and we can get broadband out faster. But I got a feeling that they're going to somehow find a way to, out of this 20 billion that originally was planned for in RDOF, that is not all going to happen, especially considering that phase 2, again, was waiting on the FCC maps. So we've got all this other money waiting on the FCC maps. Why would they then try to do phase 2 of RDOF? So, just my opinion. Exceptions may be made for the highest cost areas in final BEAD rules. Did I read this here? Oh, no, hold on. Importantly, unserved areas are those lacking reliable broadband service at speeds. Now this is talking about the BEAD program. So unserved on BEAD is a similar speed of 25 by 3. Those lacking reliable broadband service at speeds of 25 by 3, while underserved areas are those lacking reliable broadband at 10 by 20. And then there's reliable service defined in BEAD, according to NTIA, which includes fiber broadband service, hybrid fiber coax, that's cable, DSL, and fixed wireless service deployed in a licensed spectrum or in a combination of licensed and unlicensed. So if you are doing satellite broadband, and if you are doing wireless broadband in completely unlicensed spectrum, they don't consider that reliable. But they also did not say that you couldn't use that. They just don't consider it reliable. So it says here, exceptions may be made for the highest cost areas, again, top of the mountain or somewhere where it's really hard to get fiber to. And final BEAD rules will vary from state to state. Nevertheless, the rules suggest that if the FCC were to authorize Starlink's RDOF funding, the areas receiving funding could later be eligible for the BEAD program because LEO satellite broadband may not be considered reliable. In fact, it's not considered reliable according to BEAD. So in other words, the FCC could come out and say, okay, Starlink, you could have some of this money right here. Well, later on, somebody, under BEAD, somebody could get dollars for that same area. But then again, I don't think the FCC is going to offer Starlink funding in areas where it's going to be maybe economically feasible to do fiber. So we'll have to see there. It's less clear what the BEAD rules mean for the fixed wireless providers, but depending on how extensively they're relying on unlicensed spectrum, their RDOF areas also could subsequently be eligible for BEAD funding. So that's another example where, and that's a more likely example, where maybe the fixed wireless provider wins some money and they win it and they're going to do it through, let's say, all unlicensed CBRS spectrum. That's how they're going to do it. Well, it's unlicensed, but it's mid-band spectrum and it can reach over the, let's say, the gig requirement. I think it can, unlicensed CBRS maybe, but in any event, if they win that money, whether it's gig tier or not, if it's unlicensed spectrum, then somebody later getting BEAD dollars could overbuild that area with fiber because, again, it's not considered reliable service. So does the FCC really want to say we choose to have the public's money spent 2 times in the same place, Chambers asks. FCC asked to deconflict Alan Davidson, who heads up the NTIA, threw the FCC another curveball regarding the BEAD program when he said that areas that had winning RDOF bids that have not been authorized should be eligible for BEAD funding. It would be up to the FCC to deconflict those areas, Davidson said. So in other words, if at the time that these BEAD dollars are going to be deployed, if those areas are still kind of wide open with RDOF, then they'll be eligible for BEAD funding. So that's another reason I think I think they may be right here, that the FCC is just going to wait on this and not ever let some of this money go. And it will be available then for BEAD dollars, but they won't ever, once the BEAD money is put out there, they're not going to be authorizing RDOF money for the same area. So I think probably because of the length of time that it's going to take for the BEAD dollars to be approved, which is going to be sometime in, spring of next year, maybe we'll know what areas these might go to, maybe even a little bit later, then, there won't be an issue at that point. I think the RDOF thing will be settled by then because we've still got a lot of things that have got to take place. We got to get the broadband maps in place. That's going to be November before we see the first iteration of that. Then there are going to be challenges going on. Once the challenges are done, then the states are going to know exactly how much money of that 42.5 they're going to get. And hopefully they're already working with stakeholders and service providers in their areas so that they know roughly who's going to be getting that money and for what areas. But during all of that time, the FCC has a chance to either make it clear that these are the areas that are going to be getting RDOF funds, and these other areas we're not going to do anything with. So we'll have to see how that goes. Anyway, a very interesting topic, and we're getting close now to the point where we are going to be seeing I think some kind of, maybe some final awards coming through with the FCC, because again, it's been about, I think, 6 to 7 weeks since they did their last RDOF ready to authorize announcement. We've still got these top 5 ones left, so we'll have to see if any of those are authorized or ready to authorize in the next statement from the FCC, or maybe there's some smaller ones. I hadn't There might be some areas, some other operators that have gotten some money and maybe haven't gotten all of it yet. Somebody like Charter, or some others, Windstream, some others that have bid that are still waiting on some of those things. So we'll have to see. There could be some more smaller ones, but do any of these 5 come out? That'll be pretty interesting. So maybe we'll see something in the next week or 2 on that. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up if this was interesting at all. And if you've not subscribed to us, click the subscribe button on YouTube or down in the right corner of the video, and click the little bell to be notified when I'm live. And that's every day. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.